Assalamu alaikum. I'm Yasin Pons, and this is the Muslims Connected podcast, a podcast for those looking for light and direction. Today, we are joined by Fatima Essop, the founder of Muslim Family Law Hub, co-founder.
That's right.
So, before we get into the non-profit organization that you do run, let's get to know the person that you are. Where did you grow up? What did you study? Where did it all start?
Okay. Firstly, Assalamu alaikum, Yasin, and shukran for having me on your podcast. Actually, my background is I grew up in Athlone, very close to St. Athens Road Masjid.
Okay, I'm just on the other side again.
That's right.
Close.
And I'm one of 4 siblings. I have 2 older sisters, and then myself and my brother. And we all grew up in we going to the schools in the area. And I think it was in 1985 that I was in standard 6, which is grade 8. That was the year of the boycotts.
Mhm.
And so I spent most of the year out on the streets, boycotting and then attending political rallies. And so after 85, my father put me into Habibia Girls' School in 1986 because he was concerned that I wasn't in school in 1985. And that's where I then matriculated at Habibia Girls' School and felt very strongly then already about issues around social justice. And I thought that the law could be used as an instrument for social justice. And so I decided to apply for law. And I did a BA degree at UCT.
So, a big step was to choose law from such a young age, I'll say.
Yeah, it was. And my father wasn't keen. It was the understanding was all lawyers lie, but I mean, that's not the case. And so I did a BA degree, and those years we had to do Latin intensive and English and Afrikaans, and I also majored in psychology. And then after graduating with a BA, I did a LLB, which was for 2 years at that stage.
Also at UCT.
Also at UCT, and graduated, and then went on to do a master's in constitutional law. And I specifically focused on the right to housing, the enforceability of the right to housing. And I did a part of my LLM in UCT, and some part of it I did at Freya University in Amsterdam. And then I also worked, when I came back, I worked with the Constitutional Assembly, which was a very exciting time because we were finalizing the final constitution at that time, which was really interesting. And then I tutored in the law faculty as well. And then I eventually did my articles at the Legal Resources Centre in Cape Town. And they are public interest NGOs, so they basically litigate impact cases. Any case that will have a broad impact in the community, they will take it to court on behalf of injured people. Yeah, and then I practiced there in environmental law, and from there I went to the Women's Legal Centre, and it was actually there where I got exposed to Muslim personal law as the actual project. We started the Muslim personal law project there because there were so many women at that stage. There was no recognition of Muslim marriages, and we had so many women who were struggling with that. With the fact that our marriages weren't recognized, and they would come to the Women's Legal Centre for advice on various issues, from divorce to inheritance. And then we eventually founded the Muslim Personal Project, and that's where my interest started, actually. And then subsequently, I decided in South Africa, you have attorneys and advocates. It's like a split bar. And so I eventually went to did my pupillage to become an advocate, and then practiced at the Cape Bar as an advocate of the High Court. And then all this time, there were always women coming to me because they knew I was a lawyer, coming for advice from an Islamic perspective, going through divorces or struggling as a result of within their marriages, Muslim marriages that were not recognized. And at some stage in all of that, I decided that I wanted to actually do an actual degree in Islamic law to learn more about my own Islamic tradition, because I've been trained in South African law, but I was keen to learn more about Islamic law. And then I registered at IPSA for a BA degree in Islamic studies.
And because going through that, you also, especially with the law, you're seeing, I'll say, the good that when the law works for you, but also you're seeing when it doesn't work and you're trying to push through. What was like the motivation going through all of those phases?
No, so even the law itself, I've recognized over the years that the law has limits. There's only so much that the law can do. The law can't change mindsets, and it can't change people's attitudes.
Yeah.
And to just give you an example, when I was practicing as an advocate, we did a lot of equality court litigation. I did, where various, acting on behalf of various state officials were accused of being maybe racist. But it was very interesting that these matters were taken to court when in fact I thought that they were more suited to alternative dispute resolution, like mediation, what you'd call in Islamic law, sulh. Trying to get parties around a table to talk around these issues as opposed to litigating. Because in South Africa, we have an adversarial legal system. So there's always a winner and there's always a loser. Whereas in mediation, people try and sit together and come up with a solution that is no winner and loser, but at least it takes into account both parties' needs.
There's a compromise that
it's a compromise.
Middle land.
So in the space of Muslim family law, I mean, for a very long time, our marriages were just not recognized as valid marriages. So if you got married by nikah only, then if your husband or your wife dies, their death certificate will show never married. And in fact, I'm married by Islamic law only. I don't have a civil marriage. And if my husband had to die, his death certificate would indicate never married. Because there's no proof in the system, in the state system, that we married. We only have the pink little marriage certificate from the imam.
Yeah.
And back in the day, now it's much better. But when I was at the Women's Legal Center, there was a woman who was Mrs. Daniel. She was one of the first cases. And she was the client that I took on. She wasn't, her husband didn't have a will, and she couldn't inherit from him in terms of South African interstate laws. So interstate is if you don't have a will, then your estate is distributed according to South African interstate laws, because she wasn't regarded as a spouse in terms of the interstate laws. And that case was taken all the way up to the Constitutional Court, where the court eventually said this is unfair, it's unconstitutional, and the legislation must be amended to include Muslim spouses. So there you see the law working really well, because it then came to the assistance of not only Mrs. Daniels, but all women who were in that situation. And that's the beauty of impact or test cases, is that it has an impact on a large group of women. And so that's when the law actually works, and it's really nice.
But then you also need a team that's willing to drive it all the way
to
the top as well.
Of course. And because that's the other thing about litigation, it's super expensive. It's costly and it's time consuming. That, like with Mrs. Daniel's case, took a few years to get eventually the judgment out of the Concord. And if it wasn't for organizations like the Legal Resources Center and the Women's Legal Center, then these women wouldn't be able to afford to take those cases. Those organizations, they are NPOs, and they are specifically formed to take on those kind of cases. But the ordinary woman will find it very difficult to take a case like that to court because it's so expensive.
Yes, can I imagine. And then after IPSA, where did we go from there?
After IPSA, so in between, actually, it was quite interesting. While I was at IPSA, I'm not sure if you know, Salik and I founded Timbuktu Books. That was in the Stadium on Main in Claremont, which was that was a very exciting adventure, because we always we wanted to display the beauty of Islam through books and
Big
art.
Fan of Timbuktu Books.
Yeah, we love I don't know if you've ever been to a Barnes and Noble in the States. So we liked that idea of a coffee shop and a bookshop and a place where people can gather. And so that is one of the projects we also started. I think it was in 2009, while I was still practicing at the bar, and then subsequently when I was doing my degree at IPSA. So that was one of the projects which we really enjoyed, because we got exposed to so much different. We used to have book launches, and it was a place Timbuktu was open to all. And so we'd have different authors from different backgrounds launching their books or programs, which was really exciting.
Like Timbuktu, also was at ease, also as a knowledge information hub.
That's right, precisely.
Yes.
The STEM hub is quite a nice term. I see it around quite a lot. I thought we were quite special when we developed, but I see there's so many hubs. But in any event, I then, after graduating with my IPSA degree, I decided to do a PhD, where I wanted to look at the intersection between Islamic law of inheritance and South African law of inheritance. There's a lot written about Islamic law of marriage and divorce, but Islamic law of inheritance is not as researched as much in South Africa, specifically in the context of how it gets applied in the Muslim minority community. And I was very interested in also doing empirical research. So not only looking at the doctrine or the theory of the law, but how does it actually get applied within our community? And I think there's a lot to be said about doing that empirical research, because you're looking at the lived experience of people. And so during that time, when I was doing my PhD, I was also lecturing at the University of Cape Town. I was lecturing foundations of South African law and interpretation of statutes while doing my PhD on.
Yeah, I feel like you're just also doing a thing and a thing. Like you're always busy doing and learning. It's really great.
So historically, I always ended up doing a lot. I was always busy juggling lots of different projects, but I tried to kind of become more focused, I think, in my approach nowadays. So the hub has been my focus.
Took the Iqra very, very serious over there.
Yes, alhamdulillah. I mean, I think it should be for all of us a lifelong thing. We should be until you can't anymore, until you close your eyes, you should be seeking knowledge. Literally, because that's what we've been told: seek knowledge from the cradle to the grave. And in whatever my son was telling me yesterday, there's scientific evidence to show that learning languages, for instance, stays off Alzheimer's. And so this is something that is quite interesting, because it just shows our learning in different spheres can actually help you physically as well. So
the mind awake constantly also.
That's right.
And so then you went to Harvard?
Yeah. So then after graduate, the PhD journey was so hard, but alhamdulillah, I managed to finally submit in May, and then I think it was in April or May 2022. And then it was quite challenging because my mom passed away. She lived with us in June 2022. And then I got my results in July, and I was accepted into a fellowship at Harvard. And I literally got my results like on the 31st of August that I had passed my PhD, and my fellowship at Harvard started on the 1st of September.
The next day.
Yeah, so that was, but I mean, we had already relocated on the 22nd of August, and my first week in Boston was spent doing my final corrections on my thesis. But alhamdulillah, it was a wonderful experience. It was in the program on law and society in the Muslim world at Harvard Law School.
And that's a program that they have.
They have a program. And I applied to be part of the program. And it was my proposal was about around Islamic divorce and being able to the process of the Islamic divorce in South Africa, making it accessible to people and making sure that it's adhered to due process. And then also making the laws around inheritance more accessible to people, Islamic inheritance specifically, because Islamic inheritance is a very difficult area of Islamic law. And it's not, people feel, I think, very overwhelmed by it. So I thought there must be a way to make it more accessible for people. And that was my proposal, and got accepted. And we ended up relocating to Boston, to Cambridge for a year. And it was myself and my husband and only my youngest son moved with. And it was a wonderful year spent with people from different parts of the world. There was a colleague from Musawa, which is the major women's organization. She was from Egypt. And there was a colleague from Sri Lanka. And there were colleagues from different parts of the world who we then got to interact with, share our experiences while working on our research.
And how was that also as a South African and also as a Muslim doing law and being in America also at the time? Was there anything holding you back, or did it help being South African in that spaces?
So I obviously had reservations and concerns around Islamophobia, because you hear all this stuff on the media, but alhamdulillah, we had a very positive experience. We had no negative or Islamophobic kind of experiences. I think it was largely because we were based on the East Coast in Boston. So in Boston, there are a lot of major Ivy League university and colleges. So you literally have people from all over the world there. Oh. And so you just another part of the very diverse cultural, racial, religious group that's living in Cambridge. So in that sense, because people tell me there is a racism, but obviously we didn't experience it. And there is Islamophobia, but we didn't experience it. Alhamdulillah. In fact, at Harvard, they had all these, we were so worried because before Ramadan, we're going to really miss the family. But it was nothing like that, because every night they have a chaplain, a special Muslim, a really amazing chaplain, imam, and his wife, who sees to the Muslim students, and they had organized an iftar every evening for about 400 people.
Wow.
And it was all like free, and tarawih, and Eid Salah, and Eid breakfast. It was amazing. And we had South Africans who adopted us. South Africans who had not been in America for many years, and the minute they heard we were over there, they reached out to us and welcomed us, and they gave us the best experience.
Oh, that's amazing.
So it was a very, so now when I see some of the clamping down on freedom of expression on Harvard and some of these campuses, I feel so disappointed, because when I was there, it was just such a wonderful experience, because I still attended a workshop in the law school about the Harvard Law School. One of the organizations, they organized students to visit Palestine. And then those students, it's a Palestine trek, and they come back and they report back on their experiences. And I was amazed at how they were relating how difficult it was seeing the apartheid and how the Palestinians were treated as second-rate citizens. And I never thought I'd see that at an American university, let alone Harvard. But it was very very refreshing to see that. So yeah, it was a very positive experience, and I was very shocked to see how they clamp down now on freedom of expression on campus.
And then, so from Harvard, come home, and then the plan for the Muslim Family Law Hub, when did that come about?
At Harvard, actually. At Harvard. So I was working on chatting. That was the benefit of being with all these other women and different colleagues. And I was thinking to myself, what we need is a resource where people can access both sets of laws, Islamic law and South African law, under all three, under marriage, divorce, and inheritance. So that's where the idea started. And I spoke to one of my colleagues there, and she said, okay, that sounds like a good idea. Let's buy the domain name. I didn't even know, I don't understand anything about domain names. But anyway, we bought a .org and a .org, and we bought two domain names under Muslim Family Law. And we had a very basic, she helped me create the marriage, divorce, and inheritance. But it was very basic at that stage. Yeah. And then when I had my exit meeting with the director of the program, Kristen, she suggested that why don't you establish an NPO, and your house, the website is part of your NPO. And that way it will make it easier for you to also in the future raise funding, etc. And you can take it beyond the website to educational programs and advocacy, etc. And that's where the idea started, was at Harvard.
And the problem that you saw in South Africa with having the state and Islamic law run next to each other, in the other countries, did they see anything similar to that, or the lack of Islamic law being available to the people?
Or recognized? Yeah. Yes, it's very similar. It's actually very similar in the UK. And alhamdulillah, I had the opportunity at the end of November. I was invited by the University of Western Australia. A colleague of mine invited me to come in. I had to attend a conference, but also invited me to do some masterclass on Muslim family law as practiced in South Africa. And then I stayed there for 2 weeks, and it was amazing to hear the similar experiences of women specifically. So our South African law and the Australian civil law is different, but they have the same challenges across Islamic law. So let's say they get a divorce in the Australian civil court, the husband's not going to give them a talaq. And then what you have is what you call the limping marriage. And that's similar to what women might experience in the UK. They might get the divorce in the UK court, but the husband saying no, and the community saying you're still married to you because you didn't get your Islamic divorce. And so those are the kind of many challenges that I experienced here in South Africa. Women in Australia and women in the UK are having the same experience.
That also helps in terms of knowing that the problem isn't only here, and you can do, I'll say, research from and learn from these also to create ours in a better space.
Absolutely. In fact, there was a colleague of mine from the UK who came to our launch, and she was just so enamored by this whole idea that she's very keen to start something similar in the UK because there's clearly a need for it. And so that's basically how it started. It just started as a thought at Harvard. And then because I came back, it was conference after conference. I then, and workshops I had to attend to last year. But I approached this law firm in Bowman, the head of the pro bono at Bowman's is Fatima Essop, lovely woman. And she then facilitated for them to register the Muslim Family Law Hub on a pro bono basis as a non-profit company. And I then had to get a board together and approach various women in the community, very dynamic women, who fortunately all agreed to come onto the board.
What did you, when assembling the team, what were the criteria? What did you look for in the person?
So first of all, I was looking for women who felt the same way, who had a passion for empowering not only the community, but especially women, who had a strong sense of upholding social justice. And that was obviously one of the main criteria. But then I also recognized that we needed different kind of skills. You can't have all lawyers because then it sounds like an echo chamber. The more, if you have people with different backgrounds and skills, that just adds and enriches the dialogue and the conversation. And that's made a huge difference because, and also what I find is that especially at the point of, for instance, divorce, a woman finds herself vulnerable on three fronts. She needs legal help. She needs legal advice. The second issue is financial. She's usually left on a back foot financially when she's at the point of divorce. Many women, for instance, when they get married, they're working, and then they give up their job, many times at the request of their husband, to look after the family, the kids, and run the home. And then at that point, 15 years later, when he now decides that he wants a divorce, she has nothing. She's married by Islamic law only, so what she's acquired is hers, what he's acquired is his. And he's the one who's gotten the bond and acquired the house in his name, so she's financially stranded. So that's the second thing. The third thing is she needs psychological or mental support. Yes. Inevitably, when she gets to that point of divorce, she's really struggling to cope with the fallout of the divorce and the split and being away from the children now and dividing the children between her and her husband. It's a lot to deal with. So that's the third thing. And so when I approached board members, I was thinking of that. What are the kind of people who can add value in those three spheres? And then, of course, the one board member is Khadija Basir, and she ran these really amazing workshops last year called Financially Fearless, specifically directed. Initially, I think it was only Muslim women, but then she broadened it to include all women, which is quite interesting because it's not only Muslim women who find themselves in that situation. And it's not only Muslim women who haven't made provision for themselves financially for their future. It's across, it's like a universal thing.
It's like a cultural...
I don't know what it is, but it's not, it's a women generally tend to put themselves, they don't put themselves first.
Yeah.
And so they don't necessarily, and they'll spend them, if they're working, they'll put it into the family, into the groceries, into the outings, and then they sort out the kids, and the very last thing on their mind is making provision for that rainy day when their husband might die or might leave them, or for retirement. They don't necessarily make sufficient provision for that. And she was quite, she ran very innovative workshops. It was free, called Financially Fearless, and directed and empowering women around financially empowering themselves. From something as basic as making sure you have a bank account, which, believe it or not, some women in marriages don't even have, to investing in the stock market to make sure that you have some kind of portfolio, or having a retirement annuity to secure your retirement, etc. And so that was one of the reasons. And of course, she feels very strongly about generally women, empowering women, and equality and justice and social justice. And then, of course, the other person was Yasmina Frankie. She's the CEO of Sons Up, and she's doing excellent work at Sons Up. And in fact, Sons Up does amazing work as well in terms of assisting women who find themselves in that situation where they're now suddenly divorced without home, without any kind of provision. There are certain means tests that you have to pass, and then they will assist those women. And of course, she just brings such a very she's not a lawyer as well. So I always find her insights really very refreshing and different and very useful. And then, of course, the other person is Huda Abrams-Faker. And she was the lead lawyer, the lead attorney at the Women's Legal Center in the Muslim Family Law Matters for many years. So she's very familiar with this area. She's seen many women over the years, whether it be in the context of marriage, divorce, and inheritance, has helped them over the years. She's currently now at the National Advocacy Manager at Black Sash. So she too has a long history of being involved in social justice.
Sounds like a super team that you have.
Inshallah. I find that I'm learning a lot from them. And I always think there's huge benefit in having people from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
So that you don't end up being an echo chamber, because they challenge you in the way you think and come up with different kind of approaches to things, which I think is very, very useful.
And it keeps the jargon normal.
Yes, of course, because absolutely.
So it's not just these I'll say convoluted words, but it also can be for the Mensa.
Yes. And in fact, we would appreciate any feedback on that also from the website. In our minds, it might seem accessible, but so for instance, at the launch, somebody raised that, you need to make sure that everyone speaks about Mahar and Dao, but the Onto's 56 only knows Mascavi. So then we went back and we changed it to, we inserted like Mascavi, Dao is known as Mascavi in Cape Town. Not thinking, obviously, about that older auntie who doesn't know what a dowry and a Mahar is. So we absolutely appreciate feedback, and we'll try and accommodate it wherever possible.
And then when did it start, and when did it start, and how has it been moving so far?
So basically, we got registered as a non-profit on the eve of Ramadan. I think it was the end of February or something, or just before the night, or 2 days before Ramadan. I'm not sure when Ramadan was this year. So that was when we got registered. But then it took lots of work of the four of us sitting and having meetings, lots of meetings, strategic planning meetings, getting our vision clear, getting our objectives clear. What could we do? What can't we do? And that took a lot of time to get that. And then, of course, securing the people to work on the website. And then we have an amazing team from Studio Box, really, really, also 2 women, Samira and Ismet, who worked on the website. And because I'm not familiar with all that jargon, and they were super patient with us in helping us through that. And so that took a lot of time as well so it's a Muslim Family Law Hub, and one of our main resources on our platform is, of course, the website, which was the first step that we then tried to develop was the website. Inshallah, the day 2, as Khadija likes to say, do it day 2 and day 3. Day 2 is like we want to have actual educational, physical workshops within the community based on the content on the website. And then, of course, day 3 is collaborating with various service providers to make the experience easier, to facilitate the experience in navigating both sets of laws for our community. So, for instance, we then, in deciding on the website, we had to decide how we're going to upload all this. So we have all this. That's the thing, is that one of the things that I was exposed to when I was lecturing at the University of Cape Town was this thing called Engage Scholarship, which I thought was absolutely fascinating, because the idea is that you take the knowledge from the ivory towers and that you make it accessible within the community, that you work with communities to make. Otherwise, what happens is people who are in academia end up writing about all these subjects, but it never filters down to the public. So they have all these wonderful, innovative, progressive ideas, but only themselves that end up reading their own publications within journals. The person on the street is not necessarily getting access to that knowledge. And so one of the main ideas was democratizing access to information. So anybody could just, we do the hard work for you in terms of sifting out what is not necessary and what's not acceptable and what's not valid. And we're only going to give you what we know has been backed up in both sets of laws by proper sources. Do you understand? That's the idea.
Yeah. But that's also a big task to
It was huge. It was huge because now, then Ismet wanted to know, so what are we going to, so first of all, we had to decide, okay, so it's the door of marriage, Bab Nikah, Babul Talaq, door of divorce, and Babul Mirath, door of inheritance. So what do you upload for Islamic law and what do you upload for South African law? I gave her like this huge, long chapter on marriage with the references and footnotes, and she said, no. That's not going to work. That's not accessible to people. People won't get through the first paragraph. We need to make this into like bite-sized pieces that people can easily navigate through. And that's when we decided on a Q&A. Let's do a Q&A.
Yeah.
And then we said, okay, but then how? And this is what all these meetings are about. And then the web designers told us, well, on every website, like let's say Amazon, they would have a persona that they're addressing. Yeah. Right? So they know, like, this is the person who's going to buy from it. Now you have to develop a persona. And that is how we worked it out. So she said, you have to develop a persona for each door. And then based on your persona, your questions would be based on based on that persona. Which was so interesting. So
it makes so much sense.
Yeah, but there's no way I would have thought of that. Like I'm just like, this is what the fiqh says, this is what the usul says, this is what the hadith says. So this is in my mind, and I'm thinking I'm going to upload all of that. But
and they will read it and they will know it.
Nobody, because people's concentration spans are much shorter.
Yeah.
So they're not going to read that. They can go to the journal to read that. So then for marriage, we decided our persona is a 25-year-old woman. She's finished university, or she's about to, or she's working already. She's now potentially going to get married. She wants to know what are rights and responsibilities under both. What can she and can't she do in terms of Islamic law and in terms of South African law? And we then decided, okay, and then maybe we should give her a checklist of what she needs to tick off for both. So that's how the checklist idea came in. And then we said, but where will she go to for this? So we said, okay, maybe we should give her resources. So we have a resource tab for whether it be the marriage, the imam, who's a marriage officer, the lawyer who does anti-nuptial contracts, etc., etc. And then for the divorce door, it's a woman now, she's 35, she's got 2 minor children, she's now worked, and now she wants out of the marriage. And she maybe they both own the house together. What does she do? How does she get out of the marriage from an Islamic law perspective? What does she do? What are rights in terms of South African law? The checklist, and what are the resources she can turn to. And then for the inheritance door, it is a man. So the man is 55 years old, facing his mortality, wants to make sure to secure his family in terms of Islamic law, but it needs to be valid also and compliant with South African law. So he's the person who's asking the questions under the inheritance door. And that's how we that's how we developed that Q&A based on those 3 personas.
It's also so interesting because you start off wanting to do good and giving the people information and empowering people, but getting it to them is so much more, not admin, but like process to get people to learn also. You have to speak in their language also to understand.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And if one looks at the prophetic sunnah, and the Prophet ﷺ spoke to people at their level. And so it's easy to kind of present works, very detailed works with dalils from the Quran and the Sunnah. But people don't necessarily have the capacity to digest all of that. And so that's why we're trying to make it in an accessible format as possible. Although we had a long board meeting on Sunday, and I was thinking, I feel like I should be putting at least hyperlinks to the hadith that says you can do this. So those who want to can actually paste on the hyperlink and find the hadith which says you can do this, or the Quranic verse that speaks about that. So maybe that's another step where I upgrade the website by including the proofs or dalils, as they would call it. And of course, the South African law has to be updated all the time as things change.
And with regard to let's go through this, the 3 doors. What is a common, a common problem that you find women or the people going through that process that they struggle with, that you have sort of figured out the quick link through?
Yes. So at our launch, for instance, we wanted to have people with real life experiences. coming to speak to the audience. So we had a couple there, a young couple that they married for a year, and they came to explain how they navigated their marriage. It was quite interesting to find out that they didn't have a civil contract. So historically, Muslims didn't get married in terms of civil law. With historic reasons for that, they would only get married in terms of Islamic law. But now, I would have assumed that with young people, they are more educated, that they would make sure that they'd also conclude a civil marriage because there's more protection. But they don't necessarily do that, which concerns me. And then also, many who don't even do a Muslim marriage contract. So it's two separate things. The Muslim marriage contract concerns the consequences of the nikah, like your dowry, your maskabi, whatever you agreed upon. You can, now historically in South Africa, that was it. You go to the mosque, and the boy or the man, the father makes the offer on behalf of the bride. He accepts an agreed upon dowry. But actually, the Muslim marriage contract, it's a sacred bond, but it's also a contract between two parties, which means that they can include other conditions in that marriage contract. And historically, in South Africa, people don't do that. They just do the dowry, right? But you can include any other provision as long as it's not contrary to the Sharia, right? So, for instance, you could include provisions on a lot of the time about we agree that I will always be allowed to study or work, right? That you are, because a lot of the time men will tell the woman, no, I'm supporting you, stay down. But as long as you two agree, that's fine. You can upfront negotiate your terms as the woman. And another provision, for instance, is talaq tafweed, which I always tell women to include in their contract, which is basically the husband delegates his right of talaq to the wife. It can be conditional or it can be unconditional, but people don't necessarily include that.
Explain?
So in Islamic law, the husband has a right to unilaterally terminate the marriage by saying, I talaq you. He can end the marriage by simply saying, I talaq you. So that's how it works in South Africa. In Islamic countries, the man can't do that just like that. He has to go through a court process. But because our marriages and divorce laws are not recognized in South African law, men can just say, I talaq you, and then that's your first talaq that falls. Now, a woman, for her to get a divorce, she would either have to go to the Muslim judicial body to apply for a fasa, or it's an annulment, and she'll have to prove grounds. She can't just say, I talaq you. However, at the start of the marriage, she can ask the husband that he delegates that right to her too. So he has the right of talaq, and she has the right of talaq. So upfront, the father says, for the mahar of 1 Krugerrand, and Ali has delegated his right of talaq to Fatima. So then that secures the right also. And ideally, you should put it down in writing. You get that pink marriage certificate, but it should be a bit more. It should be an actual written agreement.
As you say, it makes so much sense that these things are in place.
Absolutely, because that's exactly what marriage means. It's a contract. And you can say our first house that's going to be acquired will be in both our names. If you don't want to get married by civil law, at least put something in your Islamic marriage contract which secures certain rights for you. I advise, over and above the Muslim marriage contract, that you should get married by civil law as well. But a lot of couples, quite interestingly, young couples don't do that, which I find quite interesting.
I don't think, we only, I'll say, got married again in the mosque. And then,
again?
Yeah, okay. just in the mosque. And then, so yeah, as you said, I think next year we should,
so
for
that's
our anniversary.
Interesting, because I thought young people were getting married by civil law, but it was interesting because this couple and other couple I was potentially going to interview at the launch, I said, no, they're only married by Muslim rights. And in fact, the couple who came to the launch, they at least had the Muslim marriage contract.
Yes.
Whereas a lot of couples don't even have that. All they have is that ceremony in the masjid plus the mahar.
Yeah. So,
And
then what are the benefits of having both?
Because the Muslim marriage contract is for you to enforce it, if the husband, well, first of all, if you've included, for instance, a talaq tafweed, then that means you have the right. You don't have to go through the long process of a fasakh. You can exercise that right as well. If you have included further provisions around, for instance, property, then, and there's a breach, you have to go to a court to enforce it. However, if you get married by civil law, then whatever system you choose, that's automatically valid and will be upheld. So, for instance, if you decide to get married by civil law with just going to the Home Affairs and you do a marriage ceremony there with a marriage officer, then, and you don't stipulate that you want an antenuptial contract or anything, then what will happen is your marriage will be automatically in community of property.
Yeah.
That's the default system in South Africa. You don't have to draw up any contract, nothing. It will automatically be that way. And what that means is your assets, all your assets are pooled and you jointly own 50-50 in that estate. And so on death or divorce, each person gets split halfway. The only issue with that is, and this is why the ulama, certain ulama bodies have said that that is not consistent with the Sharia. And the reason they say that is because it's not only your assets were pooled, it's also your liabilities. So if the husband incurs liabilities, then the wife will also be liable for that. And they're saying that one person can't be held liable for the liabilities of the other. And of course, each system has its pros and its cons. So, and we put that out on the website. Yeah, so that's the thing with community of property is it has its pros, it has its cons, and so if you don't get married in community of property, there are other systems like out of community without accrual and out of community with accrual. So there are different systems you can choose from, but at least in those systems, you have almost an automatic kind of protection on death or divorce, whereas a Muslim marriage only, that you'll have to go to the courts to enforce. But it doesn't appear to be that, I'm not sure how common it is for young people to enter into civil marriages.
I feel like I'm learning it today.
Yeah, that's the idea. So on the website, we set out each system and we tell you the pros and the cons of each system. And we also say that certain ulama say that it's not Sharia compliant because of A, B, and C.
And then, so that's the marriage, divorce.
Divorce is that's such a difficult one. It's such a difficult one. And it really is inevitably, it's the woman who will come to, who will seek advice and will seek help. Because in Islamic law, like I explained, and talaq tafweed, including that in the contract, is not common at all in South Africa. So what that happens is, if she's at that point where she wants a divorce, she has to wait for the husband to talaq her. And if he doesn't want to, then she has to apply for a fasakh. Now, talaq is one way of getting out of a Muslim marriage. Fasakh is another way where you apply to a Muslim judicial body in the form of a court to get out of the marriage, and you have to prove certain grounds. There's another form of Islamic divorce, which is called khula, and that is a no-fault divorce. It's basically not because he's being abusive, not because he's not paying you nafaka, you just don't love him anymore. And there's proof in the Sunnah where the Prophet ﷺ told this one female companion, then give him back whatever dowry he gave you, and then that will release you from the marriage. The thing is, that's not really applied in South Africa, but it's very valid. And so we've put it on the website as well. And we've indicated that it's applied in countries like Egypt and Pakistan. There's differences of opinion on whether you need the husband's consent or not, but everyone agrees that it's a form of divorce, a no-fault divorce. So, but in South Africa, the most common forms of divorce are talaq and fasakh. And if she can't get the talaq, then she has to go through the process of applying for a fasakh. Which can also be quite a difficult process. And then, of course, even on divorce, like I explained, she might find herself financially vulnerable because she didn't make provision for herself. And she's struggling. So we will hopefully, inshallah, have lots of resources under the divorce tab. So for now, it's just, and at the moment, it's just in the Western Cape, although people from the northern provinces have reached out to me to find out how can they get involved, because our resources at the moment are only based in Cape Town. So we stay with the ulama bodies you can go to for your Islamic divorce. And then we'll also set out, for instance, links that you can access to get maintenance for your children at the magistrate's court, or the link to the domestic violence detective you're concerned about your safety because your husband's being physically abusive. And we're in the process of uploading details, hopefully, of lawyers who can help you through the divorce. Also, mental health care professionals. I met last week with the counseling hub. They are based in Woodstock, and they, for instance, will provide counseling at 50 Rand a session for 6 weeks. So people don't necessarily know that.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of resource we'll put on the website.
Which, again, it's great that it's such a holistic take on a problem.
Yeah.
It's not just...
So one-stop shop for all your kind of issues when you're at that point of your...
Because that thing, especially going, like the fact that you cater to all the parts of the problem, because normally they go, oh, you just get a lawyer.
No, it's like I told you, there are limits to what the law can do. So even we're hoping to find, especially mediators, who can help parties mediate their dispute. Because if you can sort out your issues through mediation, then that's cheaper and it's less adversarial. Because at divorce, things get so ugly. And Islam encourages this notion of sulh. It says in the Quran, she must bring somebody from her side, he must bring somebody from his side, and they must try and solve the issue. And that's very similar to like a mediated dispute, as opposed to going the litigation route, which is very adversarial, very long, very costly.
And then do you provide...
So that's the thing. A lot of people have written and asking for legal advice. Now, we're not registered as a legal aid clinic. We can't administer free advice or give advice. Not at this stage. Maybe that's day 10. Inshallah, make dua, because we're a non-profit and we don't necessarily have the funding to employ lawyers to advise women. And that's why we have the resource tab, because we can't help you, but we will refer you to lawyers who can assist you. And hopefully we can try and negotiate lower fees or something. But we as a Muslim Family Law Hub at this stage, our main the main kind of resource on our platform is the website. And then, of course, that contains the 2 sets of laws, your checklist, and a list of resources that we can refer you to. And then the next step is obviously to run educational workshops on, because like you're saying, even if you read it, it's very different when somebody's going to actually workshop it with you and you get to ask a whole lot of questions, which are not captured in the Q&A.
Yes, and also when you're with people, sometimes either their questions you'll learn from their questions.
That's right.
Or you feel more comfortable to ask your question because it's a team building exercise.
That's right. And it was very interesting to speak to both couples, because they all went to marriage classes, which is a very good thing. But they were saying that they don't really discuss divorce. Obviously not, because people are in that very kind of honeymoon phase and nobody wants to talk about divorce. But actually it's quite important to talk about when you're very calm and very still in love. But if things go wrong, how will we deal with it? And to make provision for that. Because I promise you, at the point when things go wrong, at that point you're not interested in thinking rationally or being kind to each other. Things just go really south at that point. So actually, they were saying that maybe we should create, instead of a marriage class, a life cycle class. So then you speak about divorce and it's not so uncomfortable, because you also speak about inheritance. It's just part of the life cycle that you're married and divorce sometimes happens. So let's talk about it. And of course you die. So you make provisions for what does that mean?
All of that's, And then to the inheritance part now, which is also another, can be another messy situations within family.
Yes, very much so.
What all drove you to find that inheritance is something that must be covered?
Because, I did my PhD on inheritance. So what for me identified various issues with when I did my empirical research. For instance, so when in South Africa, typically, if people want their estate to be distributed in terms of Islamic law, they will say in their will, my estate must be distributed according to Islamic law, and on my death, this particular ulama body must decide who my Islamic law are, and they'll put that out in a certificate. So that's a standard provision. The only issue with that is that people don't necessarily understand the full consequences of what that actually means. And so, for instance, in Islamic law, or even if they understand, they then try and figure out how can we make better provision, for instance, for the wife. Because let's say after 40 years of marriage, your wife is only going to be entitled to 1/8 of your estate. And in most cases, the house is the only asset in the estate. What does that mean? Is she only going to be entitled to a 1/8 share in that house? And what happens very often is, let's say she's entitled to an 8, and now there's 2 sons and a daughter. The sons get double the share of the daughter, and everyone wants their share in the house.
Yeah.
But the mommy stayed there for 40 years, and they say, no, but we want our share. We needed to pay off the deposit on our house, and the only way they're going to get it is to sell the house, right? What does that mean? Where does that leave the mommy, right? Because in Islamic law, the sons get double the share of the daughters, and the understanding is that the sons will look after their mothers and their sisters, but that's not always the case in reality. And that's a big problem, is that then the mother is left either destitute, or she's she's beholden to the children, and she loses her independence after being in that house for 40 years. She now has to give it up and has to start anew somewhere else. So that's a very common problem. It's actually quite challenging. And then there are various other issues that can go very wrong with Islamic inheritance. And I don't necessarily think that people understand that.
And even the process of inheritance is such a long process, because many times someone will pass away, and then you're only figuring out inheritance in a year or two's time. People are still doing all those things.
Things are quite hectic at the Master's Office. The Masters of the High Court is the place where all estates have to be reported, and where it all gets wound up. But that processes have been taking quite long. And so sometimes it's because parties just can't reach agreement. Yeah. So you can imagine if you have let's say in Islamic law, if the man dies and he is survived by his wife and his 2 daughters and his brother, right? Then when he dies, his wife will get an 8. The 2 daughters will only get a half, and then the brother is entitled to the residue, the difference. Now that means that the mother now has a 8 share in the house. The 2 daughters have quarter, and the brother has the difference. Now that brother's maybe hasn't been in contact with the family, but now suddenly has he's now got a share, and he's insisting the Sharia says, but in the meantime, he's never been interested in the family. But now when he hears his brother is died and he's entitled, and suddenly the Sharia is very important. And then he says, no, you must sell the house and they don't want to sell the house because they've got a majority shareholding. There are certain states where it's just not been wound up for years because there are so many fractionalized shares in the house, they can't reach agreement. So that's another reason why estates don't get wound up. It's because the heirs can't reach agreement. Or what happens is some of the heirs who now have a fractional share in the house, they decide to stay in the house, but they're not paying the rates, or they're not paying them the water and electricity. And the others, their name is on there and they're getting the bills, but they're not even getting any benefit from that house, because the one brother refuses to move because he lived there when the father died, and now I'm not going to move out of here. But at the same time, he's not necessarily paying the bills. So the others who are co-owners, they are liable for that as well. So there are many reasons why estates can go on and on for years, because people just can't reach agreement.
And even the process, because it's one of those things, again, you only learn about once you get there. No one
That's
teaches
right.
it. So you're
right.
going through grief, and now you have
Then
to
you still have to deal with that trauma
all
as
of
well.
that, and then
It's very
paperwork
sad.
also, which is also paperwork in its own is a mission.
It's a big mission, and you know, people say it won't happen to us, but it happens to the best of families, and it can really tear families apart. Sometimes the parents don't have a will, right? And like I explained to you, if you don't have a will, then your estate will be distributed according to South African interstate laws. So this is something people don't necessarily understand, that if you die, your estate is not necessarily going to automatically go to according to Islamic Sharia. You have to stipulate that in a will. If you don't have a will, then the South African interstate laws automatically kicks in. And what that means is your spouse actually gets a better share than in Islamic law. They'll get the same portion like a child. Whatever the amount is, there's an amount that's set in the government is yet, they'll get whatever is greater of the two. Children inherit equally, girls and boys, daughters and sons inherit equally, adopted children inherit equally, children born out of wedlock inherit equally in South African interstate law. So sometimes what happens is the son will say, no, but my daddy didn't make a will, and to make sure that he's to make right for him in the akhirah, we have to enter into an agreement where we distribute it amongst ourselves according to Islamic law. But then the daughter's going to say, but why? I'm getting equally your share, whereas in Islamic law, I'm only going to get half. The adopted child won't even get if there's no provision being made. So there's no incentive for them to go and try and redistribute. And they also will have fallout and disagreements.
And then going about getting a will, what's the...
So this is World Month, I think. I think this is World Month where there's so many lawyers and institutions who are doing wills for free. So there's banks like Al Baraka, and so there's no excuse. I mean, people should use this month, but that's obviously a very standard will, not if you have like 10 businesses and 3 properties and whatever, So if you don't have a huge estate, and for most people it's just a family home and a car maybe and some money in the bank and some shares or whatever. And that's the other thing is sometimes people don't necessarily know that winding up an estate is also a costly affair. Yeah. And that you need money set aside. Maybe if you had taken out a policy to cover those kind of estate duty costs, then that would have been better. But people are not aware of that. So there's a lot of lack of knowledge. And we're hoping that through the hub and through the website as one of our resources, that we are able to disseminate that knowledge in a fairly accessible manner. And if people feel like it's not, they must tell us, so that we can try and break it down even more and make it more accessible for people.
And so we're on day 1 now?
This is day 1. Day 1 is obviously the launch of the hub and the website, which is our first resource. And then day 2 is meeting up and collaborating with various service providers so that we can load them onto, because at the moment there aren't many resources under the resource tab, but we also want to make sure that the people we load up shares our vision and our objectives and that they will be of assistance to the community. And then, of course, day 3 is actually workshopping these issues.
I'm excited. I'm asking because I'm excited for that because again, the thing that we all need to learn so that we can all help each other also.
Yeah, because, for instance, in May this year, the President signed into law the Divorce Amendment Act. Now, we would love to, for instance, workshop this with imams because they don't necessarily know that a person who's married by Muslim rights only can now approach a South African court for divorce and can ask that court to redistribute assets. That's since May this year. Wow. And even people in the ulama fraternity are not necessarily aware of that. And lawyers themselves are not necessarily sure how does it work from an Islamic law perspective, like the iddah and the talaq. So those are things that I think that we need to kind of workshop and be able to speak about with service providers, but then also having workshops once we clear with the actual community in the community on how
the sheikhs and the people.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you can't do this alone. And that is something we stressed at the launch is that we have to work with various stakeholders that are already working in the community. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. There are people doing excellent work in the community, whether it be ulama bodies, whether it be lawyers, whether it be NPOs. Like I had meetings with Ihata, Nuran of Ihata Shelters. I mean, she's doing amazing work. So that's also, for instance, going to go onto our resources under divorce. So we have to work and partner with those relevant stakeholders. And ultimately, the goal is to educate the community so they can navigate with agency these both areas of law.
It's a big task that you have.
It's a bit, it sounds quite ambitious, but inshallah, we must have high himma, and then we work towards it, inshallah.
But also,
and make dua that we're successful.
But again, it's a task that is necessary. It's not going to be easy, but I feel like it's in the right direction, and also it's to benefit not only us but also generations to come as well.
Yes, inshallah.
We need to like again, learn from
That's right. That's right. And I think it's important that people equip themselves. I mean, I can understand it if people saying it's hard to navigate thick textbooks and whether it be on a South African law or Islamic law. And we have such a beautiful, rich tradition in Islamic law. I mean, that was such an eye-opener when I went to study at IPSA, was that in Islamic law, you have these 4 schools of thought, the 4 Sunni schools that we know, but there are all these, within the schools, there are all these differences of opinion, and that is regarded as a mercy and a blessing, having those differences of opinion. This idea that Islamic law is rigid and there's one size fits all, it's completely a myth. Islamic law is flexible and it takes into account the times you live in, the context, and there are differences of opinion that one can rely on. And I think that is what we're also going to try really hard to show through the hub, is that there's different ways of doing things, including in Islamic law. And I think that's inshallah we'll be leading for.
And just before we wrap up, do you have any words of wisdom to our listeners out there, those who are interested in learning more about the hub?
Well, I would encourage people the hub is, if you go onto the website, it's a starting point. That should basically be a catalyst for you to say, oh, I didn't know this, let me go and find out more. Because we have a very rich tradition, like I said, especially in Islamic law, and people must explore that and read up. I mean, I don't know, sometimes I think we've moved away from a reading culture, but I think it's super important that we spend the time reading up more and learning from scholars, established scholars in the area, and that we remember that ultimately the objectives, the Maqasid Sharia, the objectives of the law is about justice. It's about equity. And any law that doesn't achieve that justice and equity, one must critically examine whether that's actually consistent with what Islam advocates for. So yeah, that's
a very wise point. Shukran for that. Shukran for joining us today.
Afwan.
That's all that we have managed to get in, but I do feel like we're going to see you soon in the future,
inshallah.
When this has grown into the next day and the day after that as well. We will see all the steps. Shukran for joining us today. I'm Yasin Barnes. This is
not that name.
I was about to say, as I see it now, I felt this about my mouth. Assalamu alaikum. I'm Yasin Barnes, and this is Fatima Essop. This is the Muslims Connected podcast.